Hi, my name's Celine. After my husband passed, I thought grief would be my biggest challenge. But I couldn't even get into our house, the house we built together. And when I finally did, I saw my in-laws unpacking their suitcases like they owned the place. That was just the beginning. They didn't just take space. They took control, twisted the law, turned my closest friend against me, and tried to erase me from my own life. How did it all unravel? And what did my husband leave behind that changed everything? Let me tell you what really happened. The sky was still gray when I turned the corner onto our street, Jonas's and mine. The East Austin morning was quiet, unusually still for a Tuesday. I could still hear the beep of the hospital monitors in my head, the low murmur of a nurse asking if I wanted water after I signed the release papers. I parked in our driveway like I had 1,000 times before. The front lawn looked freshly mowed, except neither Jonas nor I had touched it in weeks. I grabbed the overnight bag and the wilted bouquet from Jonas's bedside. The lavender was drooping, its scent faint. I reached for the key, the one I always used. Click. No give. I tried again. Then, the spare key I'd hidden in the planter by the porch. Still nothing. My chest tightened. I stepped back and looked at the house. Our house. But something was off. The curtains had changed. Boxes sat near the living room window. I moved closer and saw shadows. 2 figures laughing, sipping coffee like it was just another morning in suburbia. Then the first knife twisted in my gut. Maureen, Jonas's mother, perched on the couch like a queen returning to her throne. And Colleen, his sister barefoot, folding throw blankets that didn't belong to them. I knocked, not too hard at first, then louder, louder still. The door cracked open, just enough to show Maureen's smirk. "You don't live here anymore, dear," she said, her voice soaked in false sweetness. "What are you doing here?" My voice was raw. She shrugged. "This is Jonas's house. He paid the mortgage, not you." I felt my throat closing. "I'm his wife. I lived here. I still do." Colleen stepped forward, her tone flat. "You were at the hospital all night. We figured you'd prefer not to come back to all this." She gestured vaguely, as if my grief was an inconvenience. I stood there, bag in hand, as Maureen pushed the door closed. "Go back to wherever you came from. We've got it from here." The door clicked shut. I didn't knock again. I just sat on the steps, for what felt like hours. Jonas once told me, "My mom's intense, but she means well." I used to believe that. I think he did too. Maybe he had to. But sitting there, the air still thick with dew and silence, I realized, he's only been gone a day, and they've already erased me. I slept in my car that night, in front of what used to be my home. The next morning, I hired a locksmith. I watched him work the new code into the electronic panel as the sun rose behind me. I didn't feel like I was doing something wrong. I felt like I was reclaiming air I was still allowed to breathe. By noon, the locks were changed. By 3 p.m., I was served. A man in a wrinkled shirt and an apologetic face handed me an envelope while I was eating toast over the sink. Inside was a police report and legal notice. Maureen was accusing me of illegal entry and tampering with a shared property. The complaint had my name spelled Celine. I stood there, holding a piece of paper that declared me a trespasser in my own life. She claimed Jonas was the sole owner, that the house was his, that I had no claim. I felt heat crawl up my neck. Panic, betrayal, humiliation, all in a single breath. That night I stood in Jonas's office. The air was stale with old paper and lemon-scented polish. His mahogany file cabinet stood in the corner, locked. He once said, "Everything important's in here, just in case." I hadn't thought much of it then. I slid open his desk drawer, looking for a key, hands trembling. I was done feeling helpless. Buried under old receipts and thumbtacks, I found a small brass key. I walked over, dropped to my knees, and pushed it into the lock. Click. The drawer opened slowly. I held my breath. "Please," I whispered, "give me something." The morning sun cast long, cold beams through the living room blinds. The house, for once, was quiet. No footsteps from above, no scent of Maureen's overpowering cinnamon candles, no sound of Colleen's screechy laugh echoing off the walls like nails on glass. Just me and the silence we used to share. It was the first time since the funeral that I had the house to myself. But even that wasn't entirely true. Something felt off. The throw pillows on the couch were rearranged. Jonas hated that. The family portrait was half a tilt off center. A pair of shoes I didn't recognize, too small for Jonas, too formal for Colleen, sat by the back door. My gut clenched. I walked to the hallway panel and tapped into the home security system. The screen loaded slowly, then blinked to a warning. Cam 3, SD card missing. I froze. We had 4 cameras, one in the front porch, one in the garage, one over the back hallway, and one inside Jonas's office. The one now labeled Cam 3 was the office feed. I pulled up the remaining footage from the night before. There she was. Maureen, at 3:12 a.m., in her quilted housecoat and orthopedic slippers, entering with a key. One of the old ones Jonas forgot to replace. Her hand shook slightly, but her steps were confident. She knew what she was there for. She carried a small gray box. I couldn't make out the label. She went straight into Jonas's study, stayed for 12 minutes. Then she left. Calm, unbothered, the box no longer in sight. I didn't breathe until the screen faded. What was in that box? I couldn't find it after Jonas died. I searched everywhere, under the bed, in the garage cabinets, even in the attic. And she had it. Rage bloomed under my ribs. I forwarded the clip to Cambria with the subject line, "Midnight theft, we need to talk." Then I sat there for a long time staring at the screensaver as it blinked in and out of view, like a heartbeat too slow. They thought I'd be too heartbroken to pay attention. They thought grief made me stupid. They were wrong. Cambria's reply came within minutes. Get whatever documents he kept, original titles, wills, anything. This footage helps, but we need more. I knew where to look. Jonas kept a file drawer in the basement, hidden behind a fake panel. I remember him once saying, "This isn't paranoia, it's insurance." I tore the basement apart until I found it, a rubber-banded envelope marked in his scratchy handwriting, Private JM. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Inside, a notarized post-nuptial agreement, 2 signatures, one of them mine. In the event of my death, it read, all property, real and financial, shall revert to Celine Marrow, my legal spouse. I pressed the paper to my chest. He protected me. He knew. Why didn't he tell me? I dug further. Mortgage statements, all in my name. He transferred the title a year ago. He never said a word. Gratitude and anger warred in my throat. Then I saw the date next to his signature. It was 2 weeks after he'd told Maureen he was rethinking things in our marriage, something I only found out later from Colleen. He'd lied to them, to protect me. I closed my eyes, and the past slammed into me. 5 years ago, we were on the porch, fireflies glowing around us. Jonas held my hand. I was crying. Maureen had called me that thing again. She'll never understand you, he said quietly. But I do. I didn't believe him then. Thought he was just trying to smooth it over, make me stay. Now I realized he'd known. He'd prepared. I scanned every page, every document, sent them all to Cambria. The light outside was fading now, throwing long shadows across the kitchen tiles. My heart pounded. Not with fear this time, with certainty. This was my house, my life. I whispered to the walls, to the air thick with Jonas's memory. Your move, Maureen. My phone buzzed. Cambria's text lit up the screen. Now we build your case. The sun had just started to melt into the horizon when the memory came back. We were in the garden, back when Sunday still meant peace. Jonas had been planting rosemary. He liked the way it lingered on his fingers long after. And I was sitting barefoot on the stone steps, watching the bees. He looked over at me with that soft smile that meant something was coming. If something ever happens to me, he said, promise me you'll fight. I'd laughed, tossed a pebble at his foot. Stop being dramatic. He didn't laugh back. He just kept digging. The sound of metal against earth stuck with me longer than the silence that followed. And now, that sentence sits at the center of me, pulsing with new weight. He knew. He always knew. I turned Jonas's old laptop back on. It had been untouched for weeks, covered with a film of dust and a forgotten tea ring. The screen flickered before revealing his desktop, still cluttered with random folders labeled things like Q3 expense and mom calls. I clicked through each one, and then I saw it. Just in case, Maureen.mp3. I didn't hesitate. His voice filled the room, calm, measured, not the version of him people like to invent when things got uncomfortable. If she ever tries to take the house, he said, this protects Celine. I had it notarized last week. I didn't tell Mom because, well, you know her. She thinks she's entitled to everything I touch. But this house, it's Celine's. My throat closed. His voice was clear. No stutter, no hesitation. Just love, just logic. Grief hit hard, not like a slap, more like a quiet collapsing inside of me. I saved the file twice, then transferred it to a USB and labeled it with my trembling hands. That wasn't just audio. It was evidence. It was intention. Thank you, Jonas, I whispered. I don't know if it was gratitude or heartbreak, but it was raw, and it was real. That moment didn't last. Cambria called. Her tone was different, tight, clipped. Maureen filed a petition this morning, she said. She's claiming Jonas wasn't mentally fit when he signed the postnup. She's accusing you of coercion. I stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, my hands still damp from dishwater. Everything inside me dropped, like the floor had cracked open under my feet. She what? She's saying he was manipulated, that he didn't understand what he was signing. That was when the panic started. I remembered Jonas canceling a client meeting once, said he was foggy, couldn't focus, forgot names. I'd brushed it off. But now? What if that's how they spin it? What if they convince a judge that I took advantage of a man too broken to fight? I sank to the floor in his office, clawing open drawers that hadn't seen light in months. One stuck. I yanked harder. Inside, I found his old planner. Flipping through the pages, I saw scribbles of meetings, errands, grocery notes, and then, neurologist apta, just stress. He knew something was wrong, but he didn't stop protecting me. Did he ever tell her? Did she twist that into ammunition? The fear tried to drag me under. I felt it in my chest, in my hands, in the back of my throat, and then fury. Not the kind that screams, the kind that sharpens. This wasn't grief anymore. This was war. I laid out the evidence on the desk like sacred objects. The printed postnup, the USB with his voice. I took a breath. Cambria's text lit up. We fight this next week. Be ready. I opened my notes app and typed one sentence. He wasn't afraid of me. He was afraid of her. I stared at it until the screen dimmed from stillness. And still, I didn't blink. The courthouse smelled like recycled air and unspoken judgments. Every time the elevator doors opened, it felt like the building exhaled a sigh of dread. I followed Cambria through the hallway of the Travis County Family Court, my heels clicking over linoleum that had seen too many ruined families. Maureen was already seated inside, draped in black lace like she was auditioning for a Gothic opera. One hand clutched a crumpled tissue she hadn't used. Jonas's name on the docket felt like a punch to the ribs. I whispered his name under my breath, just once, like an apology. He should be here. He should be sitting beside me, squeezing my hand like he used to whenever I got nervous in public. But no, he was gone. And somehow, I was the one standing trial, for loving him, for being chosen by him, for surviving him. Cambria stood with her usual grace and requested that the judge review the neurological records we'd submitted. Jonas's documented medical history that proved his mental state was never impaired. She handed the judge the neatly collated file we'd spent days building. I watched, waiting for validation, for something to shift. The judge frowned, flipped a page, then another. This evaluation is incomplete, he said. Cambria leaned forward. I beg your pardon? The key diagnostic assessment page, the one confirming Mr. Marrow's mental capacity, is missing. No, that wasn't possible. Cambria quickly scanned through our copy again. Page 7 was gone. That page was our anchor, the proof, the solid ground beneath my feet. And now it was just gone. I felt cold flood my veins. This isn't a clerical issue, Cambria said, low and clipped. This was deliberate. I sat back in my chair, numb. Maureen adjusted her scarf and gave a long practiced sigh. It's just so tragic, Your Honor, she murmured, voice sugar-coated and slow like she was pouring syrup over a lie. She was already inside the system. She knew which gears to turn. I wasn't just fighting grief anymore. I was fighting an entire machine. And then Teresa walked in. I blinked. For a second I thought maybe I was imagining things. But there she was, my best friend since college, maid of honor at our wedding, the first person I called the night Jonas died, my backup emergency contact, and now Maureen's witness. I feel terrible saying this, Teresa began, voice trembling in a way that didn't match her steady posture. But Jonas told me once, he was feeling pressure, financial pressure, from Celine. She looked right at the judge. He said she kept reminding him that the house was in his name, that he owed her that much after everything she'd sacrificed. My stomach flipped. My nails dug into the upholstery. She was using my words, out of context, twisted into a noose. I mouthed, "Why?" Teresa didn't look at me. She looked past me, like I was already erased. From the other side, Maureen's lips curled upward. Satisfaction. This wasn't spontaneous. It was planned, choreographed, and I'd let her in. After the funeral, Teresa was always there, dropping off meals, checking in late at night, whispering, "You're not alone." No, I wasn't alone. I was being watched. I stumbled into the bathroom during recess and threw up into the sink. Paper towels scratched at my face as I tried to catch my breath. My reflection looked like someone I wouldn't trust. I heard Jonas's voice in my head again, his defense of her. "She's loyal, just scared of being alone." So she sold me out to feel chosen? My hand stopped shaking. Something else filled me up. Not rage, not even grief, resolve. I stood up straighter, reapplied my lipstick, fixed my bun. I wasn't going to let them define me with their rewritten scripts and courtroom theater. If they wanted to lie about who I was, I'd remind them. I stepped back into the courtroom and took my seat. Cambria leaned over and passed me her phone under the desk. A message blinked on the screen. "I found out who paid Teresa. You won't like it." The coffee had gone cold hours ago. I hadn't taken a sip. It just sat there, steaming once, now as hollow as everything else in this house. Light filtered through the blinds, thin lines of gold that didn't warm anything. I sat in silence, letting the aftershock of the courtroom roll through me. She didn't just lie, she sold the truth. Cambria's call cut through the stillness like a needle to skin. "You need to check your email," she said. "Right now." The transfer log came through. My heart clenched. My hands didn't shake, not this time. I opened the file. A transfer from a Cayman account. Mid-5 figures. The beneficiary, Teresa Lind, my best friend, my maid of honor. The sender, an account under Colleen's name. Of course it was her, Maureen's daughter, the clean hands in the circus. The one who always sat silent in the background, all pearls and passive aggression. She was the firewall, Maureen's buffer. The one who could play innocent while pulling wires underneath. I remembered one dinner years ago, Jonas, Colleen, and me. She laughed over wine and whispered to him, "Teresa's sweet, but she's easy to steer if you flatter her." I should have remembered. I should have paid attention. Instead, I let a viper sleep next to me while I grieved. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I picked up my keys and texted Teresa. "Coffee?" She agreed, still pretending. I chose a public cafe. I wanted eyes on us. When she walked in, her face was taut, but she tried to smile like nothing happened. I slid the transaction log across the table before she even sat down. Her mouth parted, then closed again. "I didn't know it would escalate." I leaned in. "You didn't know Maureen would use you to gut me in front of a judge? You didn't know what it meant when she wired you money from an offshore account? Come on, Teresa." Her hands shook slightly. "It wasn't like that. I needed—" "No. You wanted to matter. You wanted someone to need you, and Maureen knew that." She blinked fast. Her lower lip trembled. "I didn't think you'd hate me." "I don't hate you," I said, standing. "I hope they paid you enough to lose every piece of yourself." I didn't wait for her to respond. Back home, the house felt like it had absorbed the confrontation. Even the walls were silent, waiting for my next move. I logged into my banking app. I had to transfer funds to Cambria for our next court filing, but the transaction failed. "Error," the message read. "Funds inaccessible, under emergency freeze." I stared at the screen, tried again. Nothing. A bank alert blinked. "Joint marital assets frozen. Emergency order filed." Filed by Maureen. I was standing barefoot in the kitchen, the floor suddenly too cold. A scream tore out of me before I knew it was coming. This is mine! I grabbed the post-nut from the folder drawer, clutching it like a weapon. The notarized stamp. The signature. It was real. Legal. Jonas's handwriting. His quiet, steady love. Right there on the paper. She was trying to erase me. I punched in the number for the bank manager, left a voicemail through clenched teeth. I have the deed. I have the agreement. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. My voice broke, but I didn't let it bleed into panic. Not this time. They wanted war? Let them drown in the paperwork. That night, I spread documents across the dining table like a battlefield map. Chronologies, emails, statements, every footnote of truth they tried to bury. I unearthed it. They thrived on chaos. I was going to bury them in clarity. 2 sets of everything, one for court, one to hold close in case they tried to vanish it all again. I hovered my finger over the Submit Evidence Packet button on Cambria's shared portal. Paused. Not out of doubt, but to taste the moment. Because I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was fighting. 3 days after the freeze, I was still drinking cold coffee out of habit. The kind of numb routine grief builds in the absence of answers. My home office looked like a crime scene. Folders open, highlighters uncapped, post-it notes scattered like I'd interrogated the truth too hard. Jonas used to say I was the calm one. Maybe that's why they thought I'd never roar. My phone buzzed with a message from Cambria. You need to see this. I clicked the link. It was an old digital archive Jonas had saved on a private drive. A folder buried inside labeled Legal, Revoked Access. My breath caught. Inside were financial permissions from years ago. Jonas had given Maureen partial access to some of his accounts after his dad's stroke. But 6 months before he died, he had revoked them. A note in his handwriting sat at the bottom of the file. Too much meddling. Protect Saul. The screen blurred. I wiped my eyes, but it wasn't just sadness anymore. It was the ache of knowing someone saw the storm coming and tried to build you shelter, even if they didn't have time to show you where it was. You knew, I whispered, and you didn't tell me, because you didn't want to worry me. I closed the laptop, steadied myself, and drove into work. They were waiting. HR summoned me the moment I walked through the doors. I sat across from 2 people I barely knew from office parties. Their faces were stiff, concerned but cautious. We received an anonymous complaint, the woman said, alleging erratic behavior, outbursts, mental instability. I blinked. They explained they were placing me on mandatory paid leave pending an investigation. I wanted to laugh or scream. Instead, I asked, did they say who submitted it? They shook their heads. Anonymous. I walked out, stomach twisting. This was too precise to be coincidence. I hadn't even made it home when the email arrived. The subject line read, Concerns about your behavior. Same wording, same allegations. I forwarded it to Cambria immediately. She replied 15 minutes later. The IP address this was sent from. Soline, it was from your home. I stood in the hallway staring at the front door, locks untouched, windows sealed. A chill moved through me. This wasn't just manipulation. This was infiltration. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being hunted. I combed through the house in silence, checking every drawer, every closet. In the back of Jonas's old closet, behind a false panel, I remembered something. He once joked about building a bunker for secrets. I found it, a small floor safe. Inside, 2 USB drives, a packet of printed documents, and a handwritten note folded neatly. If they ever come for you, use this. It wasn't just paperwork. It was a roadmap. Jonas didn't leave me in chaos. He left me prepared. I sat on the floor, legs crossed, the note still in my hand. They froze my accounts, painted me crazy, tried to remove me from my job. They thought I'd break. But the thing about grief is, it strips away every illusion. What's left is bone. What's left is truth. And I was done being quiet. 2 weeks had passed since HR escorted me out the back door like I was contagious. Since then, silence had moved in like fog, settling into the corners of the house, into my chest. At night, I walked the dark halls barefoot, every floorboard creak like a threat. I changed every lock, installed new cameras, motion-triggered, double encrypted. Let them come, I whispered, bolting the front door at 2 a.m. I'm not hiding anymore. Cambria's text came the next morning. Your camera caught something. I pulled up the footage. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m., just hours after I reset everything. At first, nothing. Then, a flicker. A figure moving through the hall like vapor, silent but solid. Footsteps on the stairs. The creak of Jonas's office door. The footage ended without a clear face. But when I stepped into the kitchen, the real confirmation sat waiting. Jonas's old wristwatch. I hadn't touched it since the funeral. It had been locked away. Now it rested in the center of the table, ticking like a taunt. They weren't just trying to ruin my name. They were trying to erase me, piece by piece. The next day, I got dressed in black silk for Jonas's memorial. But Maureen wore white. She swept into the chapel like she was the one who'd lost a soulmate, chiffon floating, crocodile tears clinging to the corners of her eyes. Colleen followed 2 steps behind, chin high like a soldier. I kept my jaw clenched while she stood up to speak. "My son loved deeply," Maureen said, her voice trembling. "He chose partners who needed guidance, compassion. I gave it freely, even when it wasn't accepted." There it was. The slow knife, dipped in civility. I rose from my pew. The chapel went still. "No," I said, my voice slicing through her performance. "You don't get to rewrite this." Maureen blinked, slow and deliberate. "He didn't want you here," I continued, "and neither do I." Colleen reached for her mother's hand, but Maureen pulled it away. She turned toward the exit with a slow, deliberate smile. No anger, just calculation. "I buried my husband," I said to the room, "but I will not bury myself with him." The air didn't move until she was gone. The next morning, I woke to chaos. Edited video from the funeral was all over the internet. Someone had clipped it, added grainy filters, twisted the sound. The headline read, "Unhinged widow ejects mother-in-law at son's funeral." My inbox bled hate. "You're disgusting. She raised him and you threw her out like trash?" Poor Jonas must be rolling in his grave. Cambria called in a fury. "We're trying to pull it, but it's viral now." I sat in my living room, every shade drawn, the piano silent beside me. They didn't want justice. They wanted shame. They wanted submission. I opened my laptop and typed, "Personal statement Soline Marrow." I called in a press contact, told him to make room on the front page. They'd thrown gasoline on my grief. Fine. I'd light the match. That evening, I stood at the piano. My fingers hovered over the lid before I closed it softly, wiped it clean. "If they want a war," I said, "they'll get a woman who's ready." My phone buzzed. A blocked number. One text. "You shouldn't have spoken at the funeral." The storm started just after midnight, thunder cracking like the sky was splintering from the inside out. I stood at the front door, soaked through, hair clinging to my face, staring at the envelope in my hand. No return address, just 5 words in handwriting I knew too well. "This house will always be mine." I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. But I felt it. Something click inside me like the cock of a trigger. Not anymore. I sealed the door behind me and locked it 3 different ways. Inside the kitchen, I stared at the note under the harsh light. The slanted M, the too tight spacing. Maureen had written this. And not emailed, not mailed. Someone had walked up to my front door and slipped it under the mat. Hours ago, maybe minutes. My skin crawled as I remembered her voice. Years ago, screaming at Jonas in our kitchen like it was her stage. "This house is mine. You just pay the mortgage." Back then, he'd snapped back. "This isn't your shrine. It's our home." I'd stood in the hall, frozen, pretending I didn't hear. I pulled out a Ziploc and sealed the note inside. It wouldn't be a keepsake. It would be evidence. I called Cambria. My voice shook, but my words didn't. "File it. I'm done playing nice." By morning, she'd unearthed something worse. "She was served the restraining order 3 weeks ago," Cambria said, "but the sheriff's office never confirmed it was received." I blinked at the phone. What does that mean legally? It means it never existed. We pulled footage. Maureen had stepped onto my property 3 separate times since the order, and yet she'd stayed just far enough from consequence, skirting the system like a spider around light. Cambria's voice tightened. Someone's helping her. Maybe inside law enforcement. This wasn't incompetence. This was designed. She scheduled an emergency hearing. This time, we invited press. "She doesn't get to hide and haunt me," I told her. Not anymore. That afternoon, I walked outside for the first time in days and made my way to Jonas's garden. I hadn't touched it since the funeral. The roses were still blooming, wild, unapologetic. I knelt down and dug a shallow hole with my bare hands. The note went in first, then the dirt, then my whisper. Let her rot here, where something still grows. I leaned back on my heels and looked through the reflection in the sliding glass. My face looked sharper. My eyes didn't ask for permission anymore. She can't break what's already been reforged in fire. Later that day, I left the courthouse. My shoes echoed down the sidewalk like declarations. Cambria had filed everything: restraining order reinstated, press statement released, public hearing scheduled. We weren't whispering anymore. As I turned onto my street, my breath caught. A black SUV sat idling at the end of my driveway. No plates, tinted windows. I stepped forward. One more step, another. Just before I reached the curb, the engine revved, and it vanished. The street fell silent again, but the war had already been declared. The garden was humming again. Lavender reached up toward the sky like it had no memory of storms, and bees buzzed between the stalks as if they didn't know what this soil had witnessed. I stepped into the early morning light, barefoot, with damp grass clinging to my skin. The courthouse, the cameras, the anonymous letters, none of it followed me here. Some wounds don't close clean, but they stop bleeding. I knelt near the rose bush where Jonas once buried a note for me. He hadn't said anything grand in it, just, "You're home, always." Maybe that's why it hurt more than anything Maureen had thrown at me, because it was simple, because it was real. In my hand was the last letter, her last grasp. The ink had faded, the edges curled from rain and sunlight. I held it over the soil, closed my eyes, and whispered, "This is your last word, and it belongs to the earth now." I pressed it deep beneath the roots, my fingertips brushing damp dirt like an offering. There was no applause, no legal gavel, just the wind. But that was the moment it ended. The deed was mine again. The court had spoken. The cameras had stopped flashing. The silence that followed wasn't haunting. It was necessary. Not the kind born of fear, but of long-awaited stillness, of distance, of boundaries finally respected, even if not by choice. I'd come to realize that justice doesn't always sound like a door slamming or a judge shouting, "Sustained." Sometimes it just sounds like nobody knocking. That afternoon, I received an email from Teresa. No apology, just a single line. I thought I was doing the right thing. I wasn't. I stared at it, then deleted it. No fire, no fury, just absence. A few days later, I found myself driving through an unfamiliar part of town. I didn't realize where I was until I glanced left and saw the apartment building. A dull brick facade, curtains drawn tight, Maureen's new address. I didn't stop, didn't slow. I just drove past. The memory came without invitation. Me and Jonas on our porch, laughing over nothing, wine glasses sweating in our hands. No crisis, no drama, just warmth. The kind of night you never think to protect, until it's too far gone to reach. I didn't win, I murmured aloud. I just survived better. The next morning, a neighbor waved to me across the street. I waved back without thinking. It felt normal. Inside, the house smelled like orange peel and chamomile. No more checking locks, no more hovering over my inbox, no more Maureen. I made tea and sat by the window. No guards up, no tension in my shoulders. The mailbox creaked open later that day. I tensed, just a little, before I saw the logo. Garden Club. They were inviting me to join. I laughed, not the kind that bursts from pain, but the small, surprised kind that sneaks out when you realize you're okay. I filled out the form with a pen that used to sign affidavits. Later, in the backyard, I placed a small metal plaque into the earth beside the roses. The letters caught the light. Jonas's garden, where love grows even after. It wasn't closure. That word always felt too final. But it was something. She bent down, tucked the letter deeper into the earth, and stood taller than she had in months. I've learned something I never thought I'd have to learn. That survival doesn't always look like strength. Sometimes, it looks like choosing to live one quiet, truthful day after another, even when everything in your world has tried to silence you. Grief doesn't come with a roadmap. Betrayal doesn't announce itself kindly, but there is a strange, fierce kind of peace that grows when you refuse to be broken by either. If you're watching this and you've ever been pushed out of something that was rightfully yours, your peace, your home, your voice, I want you to know you're not alone, you're not powerless, and you're not finished. We don't always get the justice we want, but we can create the life we deserve. And that starts with knowing who you are, even when the world tries to rewrite you. So let me ask you, what would you bury to grow something new? Have you ever had to fight for peace that should have been yours to begin with? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. If this video touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments or just tell me where you're watching from. And if it didn't connect with you, I want to know that too. Tell me why and where you were when you pressed play. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this one, raw, real, and rooted in the truth we all carry, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The next chapter of someone's healing might start with your comment. Let's grow something honest together.